Hello, and welcome once again to the Black Ponderer. Or if you're new, welcome. This is a YouTube channel where we talk about philosophy. Specifically, we read philosophical texts, or we just read texts and we hone in on the philosophical themes in the text. And just do add a lot of supplementary commentary to those themes, either on me talking in the video or in the comment section below. So feel free to join the conversation. And we're here at the good old desk drinking the beverage because we laid back here at the Black Ponderer. Today we're going to be talking about some political philosophy, everybody's favorite branch of philosophy. The Black Ponderer is a huge proponent of political philosophy. In the realm of philosophy, I often think that that branch, that section of philosophy gets the shaft, which I don't know why. I guess politics is taboo, but the greatest philosophers who have ever lived, the ancient Greeks, the existentialists, the continental philosophers, medieval philosophers, they all talked about politics, right? A lot of them dedicated entire texts to politics. So, I'm trying to bring that back, trying to make political philosophy sexy again. Sexy, whatever Justin Timberlake said. Anyway, we're going to be talking about, it's going to be mutual aid. The glare is really strong with this one. So we're going to use this thumbnail. It's called Mutual Aid. Okay, that's about as good as it's gonna get. It's by Spade. The subtitle is Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next One. So mutual aid, what is it? That's what we're gonna explore today. Mutual aid is a concept, a political concept. It is also a community concept, community centered. It's a sociological concept. It's about organizing, organizational structures. It's not just, you'll hear mutual aid in activism a lot, and that's a very important aspect of activism. But it's, some people will get all spicy and offended saying like, oh, this far left radicalism. And it's not really. It's not really. It's actually, it is. It is. But is that really a problem? I would argue no. Right? I'm the Black Ponderer. We all about the far left way of thinking. Let's dive into this text here, mutual aid, and we will begin with reading some quotes, which is what we do here at the Black Ponderer. We actually read the text. And then we, break it down. So this right here is from the introduction. It's the first paragraph. I don't have page numbers because this is a printout, so there's really no page numbers here. But it's the end of the first paragraph, and I will begin. Ordinary people are feeling called to respond in their communities, creating bold and innovative ways to share resources and to support vulnerable neighbors. This survival work, when done in conjunction with social movements demanding transformative change, is called mutual aid. So the text here is talking about people being called to respond to crisis. And what the crisis that this text is referring to is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still going strong, to be honest with you. But this is when the COVID-19 pandemic was really raging and lockdowns were at, an all-time high. And it was crisis mode. And so that's what this text is referring to right here. And so while a lot of social institutions were failing in terms of healthcare, in terms of passing around PPE, personal protective equipment, and vaccines weren't getting distributed properly. A lot of access to nutritional food and such like that was getting more and more restricted. Mutual aid programs started popping up. So it was a response not only for a need, but it was also a response against a lot of social injustice going on. a lot of inequality to access to healthcare and food resources. So that's a key understanding of mutual aid versus another thing we're going to talk about. When we're doing mutual aid, there's this focus on transformative change and like social justice, social equality. Okay, but let me continue here. I skip down to the second paragraph. This is a little toward the end. At its best, mutual aid actually produces new ways of living where people get to create systems of care and generosity that address harm and foster well-being. And so we're talking about using the example that the book is referring to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how, for example, masks were hard to come by to cover your face to prevent the spread of the germs. People would step up and start knitting their own masks. Now, there was a lot of research done. We found out like knitted masks weren't as effective as those N119 or whatever they call it, the professional hospital quality masks. But back then we didn't know, and also like any face covering is better than no face covering, right? And a lot of that was done in mutual solidarity, right? People were passing out masks that were homemade, and a lot of people were actually they were acquiring those high quality masks, and they were distributing them to the public without help from hospitals and healthcare institutions. And that's just one example, right? But this is what the text is referring to. This is the introduction. So it's trying to ground you in the concept with a real world example. So let's get into the nitty gritty and just talk about like the definition here. What is mutual aid, right? Part 1. And I'll just read right here. Mutual aid is collective coordination to meet each other's needs, usually from an awareness that the systems we have in place are not going to meet them. As we were just saying, those systems in fact have often created the crisis or making things worse. And when you talk about like, we'll stick to the example of the pandemic. What caused the pandemic? You got all this racism. Say, well, it was China. China did. Well, no, actually, a lot. It really is these systems that we have in place that prioritize profit over livelihood, right? Where people are forced to work under conditions that are not healthy, and where they're getting exposed to adverse health care, and not only that, like environmental damage and damage to like animals and ecosystems, which kind of throws off this balance and like creates these conditions where these viruses can spread, and also climate change and all this geological, even geographical destruction, right? Causes these environmentally harsh conditions where viruses are more prone to spread rapidly, right? And it's these systems, these like hyper-capitalist systems, these like, even I would go so far as to say patriarchal systems, right? These are what fosters this kind of like damage. And this is what caused this virus to like not only spread at such a high rate, but even like make it easier for it to be developed to begin with. That's what the text here is talking about. And then we continue with the definition. Mutual aid directly meet people's survival needs and are based on a shared understanding that the conditions in which we are made to live are unjust. And I'll skip a paragraph. Today, many of us live in the most atomized societies in human history. Ooh, what's that word? Well, let's dive into that. Which makes our lives less secure and undermines our ability to organize together to change unjust conditions on a large scale. Oh, so let me pause there. Atomized conditions. Yeah, so we live in these little inner circles, right? Where, oftentimes, it's particularly the country where I'm from, the United States of America, we're kind of taught to just worry about our immediate families, right? Or like our inner circles, if that. Sometimes we're just taught like, hey, you just gotta worry about you, me, myself, and I. But you start going to organizations and religious institutions, they're focusing on more like, okay, family. But So we're only conditioned to care for our inner circles, right? And then of course social media doesn't make this any easier with these echo chambers. Interestingly, the internet was the theory behind the internet when it was first being conceived was like, oh, you're going to make people more open, right? People are going to interact with people from around the world, and ideas are going to be exchanged freely, and people are going to be more accepting of various ideas. And actually, a lot of that is happening, hence the Black Ponderer, right? But there's also, the internet is also pushing this inwardness, right? Where you have these social echo chambers, I would say, right? And that again, we're talking about at these systems that create these adverse environments, ad revenue, right? we're dealing with financial economies that are dependent on ads, and so advertisers they need demographics to target, so they want to have little demographics and little groups. They want to group people into as small sections as possible to spit ads at them, right? And this has caused us to really bunker down in our little camps. And so we don't think outside the box, and we don't think outside of our little inner circles. And we don't acknowledge the interdependence and interrelation we have with people from around the world, and even people that are even within our communities, right? One neighborhood over there is not thinking about the other neighborhood, even in the same city, right? Because we're all in these little echo chambers. And that's really been very destructive. And mutual aid is against that. Mutual aid is like, hey, let's realize how humanity lived mostly throughout our history, rather than this new phenomenon of just being bunkered in, which basically pretty much started I would argue in the 50s, right? With the whole nuclear family, and the wife and the kid and the wife and the husband and the 2.5 kids and the white picket fence and the dog and the cat and the goldfish, and then the suburban life, right? But let me continue here. We are put in competition with each other for survival, and we are forced to rely on hostile systems like healthcare systems designed around profit, not keeping people healthy, or food and transportation systems that pollute the earth and poison people for things we need. We were just talking about that. More and more people report that they have no one they can confide in when they are in trouble. You just call 911 immediately, or you call the police. But less and less people are like, well, maybe I should call my neighbor, right? Or that guy around the block, right? That's how it used to be, but that is not how it is anymore, because the systems that we live in are not promoting that kind of community. This means many of us do not get help with mental health, drug use, family violence, or abuse until the police or courts are involved, which tends to escalate rather than resolve harm. We made several videos about that. In this context of social isolation and forced dependency on hostile systems, mutual aid, where we choose to help each other out, shares things, and put time and resources into caring for the most vulnerable, is a radical act. It's a radical, these terms, you'll throw out these terms like mutual aid, which, now it's actually flogged in domestic terrorism watches, which is a crazy thing. A lot of law enforcement agencies like the CIA or FBI, they're looking at these social groups around America and the greater Americas, and they're like, oh, this group uses mutual aid, gotta watch out for them. That's a radical term. And it's kind of sad it's sad because, first of all, it's sad because it is radical when it shouldn't be. It should be commonplace. Second of all, it's radical because we have to actually do things that are outside our commonplace systems for help and getting the things that we need, and to be sharing resources with our community. that has become radical, and that's sad. But mutual aid is bringing that to light and saying like, hey, we should do something about this. So I'll continue on chapter 1. This is the second sentence. Mutual aid projects expose the reality that people do not have what they need and propose that we can address this injustice together. Hello. Okay, this is the second section of chapter 1, first paragraph. Being able to get help in a crisis is often a condition for being politically active because it's very difficult to organize when you are also struggling to survive. Getting support through a mutual aid project that has a political analysis of the conditions that produce your crisis also helps to break stigma, shame, and isolation. So that's important. Mutual aid is a political action. So again, I want to return to the fact that we can't be dodging or hiding away from politics. And it's important because I still get comments to this day like, please, you're a philosophy channel, don't talk about politics. I mean, if Aristotle took that advice, we wouldn't have half of his philosophy, right? If Plato said, oh, I'm just not going to talk about politics, then we wouldn't have the Republic. Let's not get started with Karl Marx. He just wouldn't exist, but he's a philosopher. But, it's just silly, right? And it brings up a good point there. It's an analysis of the conditions that cause you to be in a crisis to begin with. And that's philosophy, right? Understanding why you are where you're at, right? And analyzing the meaning of your condition, right? And a method to do that is politics. Hello. But I continue reading. Under capitalism, social problems resulting from exploitation and the maldistribution of resources are understood as individual moral failings, not systemic problems, right? So capitalism is like, hey, you are not getting what you need, that's your fault. It's like, well, no, actually that's the system that we're in. That's the system's fault. But capitalism would like you to think otherwise. Getting support at a place that sees the systems, not the people suffering in them, as a problem can help people move from shame to anger and defiance. Right, so you're moving away from a state of helplessness and nihilism and ambivalence to a state of, look, I could do something about this. Oh, I'm empowered. Oh, I can actually correct this. Or there's some things that I could do. That's mutual aid, but we'll get more into that. Mutual aid exposes the failures of the current system and shows an alternative. This work is based in a belief that those on the front lines of a crisis have the best wisdom to solve the problems and that collective action is the way forward. And I skipped down 3 paragraphs. Okay. Solidarity across issues and populations is what makes movements big and powerful. Without that connection, we end up with disconnected groups working in their issue silos. We're talking about the little echo chambers, the little camps, the little tribes, undermining each other, competing for attention and funding, not backing each other up, and not building power. Mutual aid projects, by creating spaces where people come together on the basis of some shared need or concern in spite of their different lived experience, cultivate solidarity. And this is a thing we talk about a lot in the Black Ponderer. I'm a huge proponent of independence is a myth, independence is an illusion, it doesn't exist. Right? Nobody's independent. We're all interconnected. We're all dependent, right? We're radically dependent. If we didn't have each other, we'd be dead instantly, right? And if you think oh, I'm just doing it by myself, you're living in a delusion, right? And so mutual aid is look, the reality is that we're all in this together. We share resources, whether we like to think we don't or we acknowledge that we do. The fact of the matter is we share resources. That's just how this reality existence functions, right? So let's take advantage of it. Let's acknowledge that and push it forward. The problem is the current state of affairs has us believe that that's not the case. And we're in some deep shit because of it. Let's be honest. That's the true reason why climate change is an issue, is because we, and the society wants us to believe like, oh, you know, this society over here is doing its own thing and it has nothing to do with this society. And that society is failing because it's just not working hard enough. But it's like, you know, there's no acknowledgement that one society is exploiting another society tremendously, and they're like extracting all these resources that are destroying the environment for everybody, right? And they're not acknowledging that interconnection. So then there is that interconnection, right, where the society that's doing the harm is being harmed by that through like extreme hurricanes, which we're seeing right now with Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, right? And you know, these hurricanes are some of the most biggest we've ever seen ever in the history of our recorded history of hurricane watching, right? And so like it's coming back to us, but we're trying to acknowledge it. But mutual aid is like, hey, we need to understand the interrelation with each other and start helping each other out. And then you can just go further into that about how, you know, all the environmental destruction that's caused, and like all the the social institutions that are trying to help, these charity organizations, and are not helping adequately. But what's really helping out is mutual aid projects, right? They're the ones giving the need that's really fulfilling people, right? But we're going to get into that too. But here we are on section 3. This is the second paragraph. Mutual aid is inherently anti-authoritarian. Anti-authoritarian, right? But that means that we're talking about anarchism, right? Demonstrating how we can do things together in ways we were told not to imagine, and that we can organize human activity without coercion. Most people have never been to a meeting where there was not a boss or authority figure with decision-making power. Most people work or go to school inside hierarchies where disobedience leads to punishment or exclusion. We bring our learned practices of hierarchy with us, even when no paycheck or punishment enforces our participation. So even in volunteer groups, we often find ourselves in conflicts stemming from learned dominance behaviors. But collective spaces like mutual aid organizing can give us opportunities to unlearn conditions and build new skills and capacities. By participating in groups in new ways and practicing new ways of being together, we are both building the world we want and becoming the kind of people who could live in such a world together. All right. So it's about helping each other without hierarchy or without like, you know, holier than thou attitudes, or like, you know, this giver-receiver relationship of like, well, I'm the giver, so I'm better than you. And you know, oftentimes in these acts of giving, these charity acts, you know, that's not explicitly said. Sometimes it is explicitly said, but oftentimes it's not. But it's still very obvious. It's this like holy, and literally sometimes it is a holy, like a lot of churches do this, right? Where it's like, you know, we're able to give you good things because we're morally better than you, right? And so become morally better, and then you could be as good as we are. So here's some food, here's some charity, here's some clothes, and do better, right? I mean, that's really what it all boils down to. And you know, you can look at it that way, or you can look at it like, look, work harder, you know, become more of a capitalist, then you'll be able to succeed. But this like laziness is why you're where you're at, right? So, and this is like a hierarchical, like authoritarian, a top-down approach to help, which mutual aid is against. And let's delve more into that concept, shall we? This is chapter 2. Mutual aid is not charity. Well, I thought charity was good. Well, charity, aid, relief, and social services are terms that usually refer to rich people or the government making decisions about the provision of some kind of support to poor people. That is, rich people or the government deciding who gets the help, what limits are to that help, and what strings are attached. You can be sure that help like that is not designed to get to the root causes of poverty and violence. That's not why that help exists. It is designed to help improve the image of the elites who are funding it and put a tiny, inadequate band-aid on the massive social wound that their greed creates. And it keeps going. Listen to this. The charity model we live with today has origins in Christian European practices of the wealthy, giving alms to the poor to buy their own way into heaven. That's what it's based off of. Charity model, today's charity models, even if it's like, it appears to be secular charity models, business charities, right, or non-profit organizations, it's still got that basis in Christian European practices of like giving alms. Right? And so why is this problematic? Well, it is based on a moral hierarchy of wealth. The idea that rich people are inherently better and more moral than poor people, which is why they deserve to be on the top. Not surprisingly, the charity model promotes the idea that most poverty is a result of laziness or immorality, and that only the poor people who can prove their moral worth deserve help. Contemporary charity comes with eligibility requirements, such as sobriety, piety, curfews, participation in job training or parenting courses, cooperation with the police, a lawful immigration status, or identifying the paternity of children. In charity programs, social workers, healthcare providers, teachers, clergy, lawyers, and government workers determine which poor people deserve help. So they're the arbiters. Who deserves help? Well, I get to decide who deserves help. It's like, well, no, actually, help is something that everybody deserves, right? But not in the current charity models we have today. Their methods of deciding who is deserving and even the rules they enforce usually promote racist and sexist tropes, such as the idea that poor women of color and immigrant women have too many children. We still hear that today. Or that black families are dysfunctional. Hello. Or that indigenous children are better off separated from their families and communities. Still dealing with those consequences. America, prime example. But, other, all the Americas, Canada, Mexico, I could go on. Or that people are poor because of drug use. That's why they're poor, because of drug use, right? It's not because we live in a system where there's no social assistance when people run into problems, or like maybe when somebody's dealing with a mental health problem, there's no way for them to actually get help. No, it's just because they're a drug addict. That's why. And so, like, again, it's like there's no root cause analysis. Right? There's no like actually thinking about what is the ultimate cause of this problem, right? It's more like moralizing and like, well, this person's a bad person, so they don't deserve this help, but I'm going to give it to them because I'm better than they are. That's this kind of thinking that mutual aid is countering. And then I skip down 2 paragraphs. Charity makes rich people and corporations look generous while upholding and legitimizing the systems that concentrate wealth. Because if they're just giving people help, they're like, hey, I'm better than these people, I'm going to give them help. Oh, how good. They're good. So they're not the problem because they're actually giving the people help. It's the ones that need help, they're the issue. But, as we know, and it's obvious. Sometimes we know that these things are happening, but we don't want to confront the issue because they're hard truths, right? We're well aware that corporations are corrupt, and that businesses often cause problems, but we like to default into these ideas of nonprofit organizations and charity models as like helping out, because that's just an easier to accept, and it's also like constantly being driven down our throats, right? Whereas mutual aid is like, no, actually, we can help each other, but we have to understand that the systems that are causing all this wealth concentration are what are destroying people's lives. Like, that's why homelessness is a thing. That's why poverty is an issue. That's why immigration is the mess that it's in now. It's not because immigrants are crooks. It's because imperialism, great powers like the United States, go into other countries, extract their resources, and at the expense and exploitation of other countries, causing all types of government political problems that create refugees, right? And then refugees find places to go, and then they come to and then it's interesting, the when you analyze it, it always comes back, right? It always bites you in the ass. What you do, reap what you sow, right? I mean, these sayings are here because they do have some truth to them, right? Where it's like, okay, now the problem that we caused, the United States of America caused, for example, with immigration, like now people are coming from the mess that the United States government made. They're coming to seek help for us, and we're like, well, we're not the problem. They're the problem. It's like, and so we have these charity miles and all the crap that are like not really solving the problem. But mutual aid is saying like, look, we got to acknowledge that these systems that are these social economic power structures are really the problem. And so we need to acknowledge interdependence and interrelation and do acts of aid through that acknowledgement. And here, this is chapter 5. This is the co-optation section. This is the 6th paragraph. Mutual aid projects may appear to overlap with privatization and volunteerism in that participants critique certain social service models and believe that voluntary participation in care and crisis work is necessary. But the critiques of public safety nets made by mutual aid project participants are not the same as those of neoliberal politicians and corporations who tout volunteerism. Mutual aid projects emerge because public services are exclusive, insufficient, punitive, and criminalizing. Okay? So that's why mutual aid projects happen, because the social economic systems we currently live under, they focus on providing wealth to a small few people, elites, exclusive, and they're insufficient to helping all people. They just help elites, right? They're punitive, okay, based off of punishment and violence, right? And they're criminalizing. They criminalize those that they don't help. That's how they excuse them from not helping. They're like, yeah, but what about like all these people that are suffering under this system, like homeless people, poor people, impoverished people? And then the response is, oh, those are criminals. Those are deviants. Those are thugs, gangsters. They're idiots. You can just keep going, right? But let me continue with the text. Neoliberals take aim at public services in order to further concentrate wealth and, in doing so, exacerbate material inequality and violence. Mutual aid projects seek to radically redistribute care and well-being as part of larger movements that work to dismantle the systems that concentrate wealth in the hands of the 1%. So it's just a direct response. It's an actual acknowledgement of the problem, right? Versus charity, which is like charity doesn't acknowledge the root cause, whereas mutual aid acknowledges the root cause, and then it proceeds based off of that. And that's, I would argue, philosophical, which is why I feature it on this channel. Right? It's a philosophical way of approaching aid, and that's what I would say mutual aid is. It's a highly philosophical way of conducting help in society. Whereas charity, you just put the blinders on, you just go and like, hey, here's some money, yay, I did some good thing, I feel good about myself. Okay, let me just keep operating as usual, not addressing the core problem. And so yeah, that's about it that I would like to talk about in this book. Of course, like the book goes deep into like, okay, how do we actually do mutual aid, right? And it goes really into that, which is great. And I would encourage you, if you aren't familiar with the concept of mutual aid, I would encourage you to check out the book because it really breaks it down. I think this is a great book for somebody who's never really heard of mutual aid before, or they just don't. Maybe they heard of it, but they are not fully aware of what actually is it, right? If you're an inexperienced activist first starting to get into activism, social activism and you're like, wow, how should I go about activism? Like this, I would encourage you, one of the go-to books. It's pretty short, which is cool, so it's approachable. But I would say that it has some really deep philosophy. The first section it has a lot of theory. And then like the second section goes into application, which is great because you can't have just theory and that's it, right? Okay, how do we apply it? And that's what's really good about this book is that it has some, it goes really into specifics. It talks about, okay, what happens when your organization has money? How do you handle money? Okay, how do you run meetings? Here's how you write an agenda, right? It goes into like those kinds of specifics, which is pretty awesome, I think. So I would encourage you to check it out, Mutual Aid by Dean Spade, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next. Well, you've been watching The Black Ponderer. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.